Welcome to this special episode of the Shared Security Podcast. This is part one of our series with PlexTrac, in which we'll be discussing the problem of data overload in the world of vulnerability remediation. And joining me for this conversation is Dahvid Schloss, co-founder, course creator, emulated mob boss at Emulated Criminals, and Dan DeCloss, CTO and founder of PlexTrac. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm a little intimidated by that title from Dahvid. I'll have to, I'm going to have to live up to that.
Yeah, we're going to get the full background on that title for sure in a minute here. But for our audience, so as I mentioned, this is the first episode in our three-part series, and we're going to be talking about key data and workflow challenges that are burying many of us in this industry into busy work and just really distracting us from the bigger picture, which is creating business value and, of course, data security. So first, before we dig into this topic, I'd like our guests to give our audience a brief overview of who you are, a little bit about your background. And let's start with you, Dahvid, because I want to hear more about what an emulated mob boss is.
No, it's exactly what it sounds like, right? It's the guy that doesn't get to do the fun stuff, but comes from the world of doing the fun stuff. Now, I put it that way mainly because most people just don't understand what red teaming is. They don't understand the offensive security world, but when they hear mob boss, they immediately understand, oh, crime. And, I don't want to say that we're just straight criminals, right? So emulated mob boss of a group of emulated criminals. My background, a little bit about that is I started off in the military as a communicator guy. Did special operations communications for a few years, SATCOM, radios, the whole 9 yards. Got an injury and then moved over to cyber, and the rest was written in history there. Fell in love with the field. It's never feels like a job, It's just like, it's just too silly, too much fun. But that's a quick down and dirty about me. Let me pass it over to Dan because he's the cooler of the two of us.
Yeah, I won't claim that title, but again, excited to be on the show and in this episode and the series of episodes. But my background, I've been in cybersecurity. I was just reminiscing. It started 20 years ago, which is a little nerve-wracking that time span is starting to continue to grow. But I was on the government civilian side. I went to the Naval Postgraduate School and was formally, I would say, probably the most formal. People can get into cyber. I wasn't the one that was kind of in the basement learning it myself. I was more formally trained, but really, kind of in the earlier days, not the earliest, but it was a lot of fun and wore a lot of hats, and then just continued to grow in the industry and kind of found my niche in like web application security, pen testing. And through that, had the idea to start PlexTrac. And so now I've been more on the executive leadership side, both from entrepreneur, startup founder, growing, getting funding, moving into a CTO role. So that's been a lot of fun, just focusing on the mission that we have, but don't get to tickle the ivory or tickle the keyboard as much as I used to be able to in terms of hacking. But it's so much fun to just have relationships with folks like you guys and our customers, where we can tell we're really making a difference in their lives, and they're on the front lines doing some of the heavy lifting. So it's fun. So.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me to talk to people, especially the two of you that have had background in government and military, and myself too. I was in the Marine Corps, and I didn't do any of this in the Marine Corps. This was like totally different for me, and I just find it interesting that there's always that link back, right, to what we all do, and also the things that we've learned in government and military and how that applies to our jobs today. So, just fascinating. So. Well, great to have you both on. And why don't we get started with talking about this data problem? And Dan, I want to throw that first question out to you, because security teams these days are just overwhelmed with data, right? From all kinds of sources, whether that's scanners, cloud security tools, just tons of different tools, and not to mention asset management platforms, right? That are kind of a little bit newer in the space, but just another area of overwhelming data. So how do organizations typically struggle with this? What are they finding now?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's exactly right. You know, I think we've as if we've been in the space a long time, you know, we've kind of grown up with, hey, how do we get a handle on like what does it mean to be secure, right? And some of the and even like the frameworks like CIS and NIST, you know, they always talk about, hey, first you need to kind of know what you should be protecting. And I think that problem statement, which is not, I mean, it's a very valid problem statement. I mean, obviously, we want to try and have a handle on what we're trying to protect. But that has led our industry into this mode of continually finding ways to identify more issues and more assets, right? And more attack surface, right? Which is all in and of itself good, but it just continues to find like more and more stuff, right? And so I think that organizations are starting to feel that tension now of like, okay, we for the most part, we can do a good job of finding things, right? You know, now I would posit that we're still not very good at finding everything, and that's a really that may never be solved, right? But I think that in general, the industry has come out with lots of solutions for all the different kinds of technologies that keep coming out. But organizations are just continuing to get overwhelmed with like, okay, I have a lot of data, I have a lot of assets that I can discover, attack surface I can get more information about, as well as just vulnerabilities and exploits. And then on top of that, you know, from our space, it's the penetration testing information that starts to become really critical. And how do you make sure that that doesn't get lost in the noise with everything else, right? But so I think that's kind of the problem that organizations are faced with is we're doing a good job of identifying a lot of sources of data and a lot of information coming in, and then like, you know, what am I supposed to do with all this? How do I manage it? And so that's where we're seeing, you know, kind of the continued growth or focus on aggregating that data together, being able to correlate it. Now with AI can do a lot of things like that even better, right? So I think organizations are continuing to start to get a handle on, hey, consolidation is important, you know, and then being able to really highlight what are the most important things to focus on.
Yeah, definitely. I'm interested in your take, David. Kind of what strategies have you seen in terms of like organizations thinking about the data problem and how they're normalizing, consolidating all this data through with all these different tools that we have?
Yeah, I think the classic one that we usually see is the Excel sheet, right? Where everybody just kind of dumps it in.
Yeah.
They're
Oh
like,
gosh.
good luck. No, I think if you want to talk like the best strategies I've seen for it, typically start from picking a risk structure that makes sense for them, right? So when I say risk structure, probably different terms, different terminology for everyone since cyber has a dictionary problem. But I'm talking more of like your CVSS or your dreads or those kind of items. Starting off with something that is agnostic to whatever, what do we want to call them? I guess like I call them rabbit holes, right? Because
Mhm.
I forget English a lot. So like, you know, you want to go down the rabbit hole for web, that may make sense for something like Dread, but it makes less sense with CVSS or with an application, so on and so forth. So coming up with a risk scoring strategy that makes sense for you and being able to quickly identify what those categories are, regardless of the tool set that you're using, will help at least prioritize, right? Because that first and
Mhm.
foremost is going to give you the idea of like, all right, hey, Nessus says that this is a critical, but truthfully, it's probably not a critical, right? Um, that tends to mean that as an org, you probably have to make your own, right? And there is no one shoe fits all kind of risk score metric for everyone. So some of the bigger orgs that I've worked with, I see them implement something like that on their own with some form of tool, whether that be the Kennas of the worlds, the PlexTracs of the worlds, the, you know, wherever you can consolidate information from different sources, they'll start to integrate their own little risk scoring so that they can keep track of things and prioritize it that way. Beyond that, like getting out of the Excel sheet is step number one, and that's probably the most helpful any org is gonna, or the most beneficial that they'll get is by leaving there. Man, English is tough today. I haven't had enough caffeine apparently. Um,
That's why I double the caffeine because it's going to be one of those days, right?
yeah,
Yes.
it definitely is, right?
Yeah. So do you see any other, like besides the spreadsheet thing that everybody does, right? Are there any other common mistakes that people make with trying to manage large amounts of data?
100%. They remove all context, right?
Mm-hmm.
The most important context to business is financial impact, right? And if we aren't providing context to the vulnerabilities, to the information that we're receiving about potential risks, we're not really able to convey those risks properly to shareholders, to the board, to leadership, because to the less technical folk, right? Cyber is an expense. Why are we spending millions of dollars on all these tools and we never get hacked? It's the whole concept of like the old B-52 bombers coming back from bombing runs. Like, oh, we need to up armor the wings. Like, no, you need to up armor the center. That's the only parts that aren't coming back, right?
Yeah.
So when we don't provide any context for like, hey, this risk can lead to the disclosure of 1 million records of PII, per se, right? Okay, cool. 1 million records of PII means nothing to an executive. Now throw in something like IBM's cost of a breach. It's $173 of damages to the organization per record. Times that by 1 million, now you're looking at $173 million in damages, right? Now all of a sudden you're able to communicate properly and effectively start focusing on the risks that are most important to the organization first.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think then that allows them to prevents them from truly you get this swath of data and you don't have the context, so they just start to focus on the wrong things, right? Like they may be focusing on fixing something, but they're just not as they're not spending their time as wisely as they could. And I think I've seen that a lot, right? Especially even when I was I ran a blue team, and it was really hard to get a handle on, hey, how do we know, like we've got all this information, and trying to even like find out what the context is a big chore in itself, right? So like, yeah, I think those are some of the challenges, right?
Yeah, and Dan, have you seen any unique approaches to this, like from an automation perspective? I know everyone's going to mention AI will fix everything, right? But like maybe one day it will, right? But to get there, what have you seen people do in terms of that prioritization and
Yeah,
insight?
and David alluded to it as well, as like we talk about the context, but what I've seen truly is, and even from early days when we're talking more about like in the SOC, right, where it's like, hey, what alerts should I be focused on first, right? Because that's, I would say, when we talk about like data inundation, that's the area that SOC first, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It was like the
Yeah.
SIM was like just overwhelmed with log data and how do you provide the correlation, but I think the tried and, from my experience, the tried and true techniques is like, hey, what are the assets that we want to focus on? What's the data that we want to focus on? And what do we truly define as the crown jewels? And starting there and then expanding out, right? So that means like, hey, it does take some data analysis, like and that's where you need a central place to aggregate that data together, consolidate it down, and be able to start cultivating it, right? So like, hey, these assets, they're all in the DMZ versus the lab environment. These applications house very sensitive information. So it's some of that hygiene on the data side, right? But techniques that I've seen is like being able to aggregate that together and do it more in bulk, right? And that's where I think, I mean, obviously we think AI can play a factor or play a role. It's maybe not 100% there yet, but meanwhile, that's the same, those are the techniques I think that people are using, and anytime you can do things in a couple different ways, you can start to automate it, right? And so start to draw a correlation between the data, and that then provides the groundwork for other things that you can start to do when we talk about like risk scoring and things like that, right?
Yeah. And I know before the show, we mentioned the role that threat intel plays into all of this data correlation and giving you those insights. Can you speak to how that plays into this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because like, when we want to, again, the context is so critical, being able to identify like, hey, these things are being exploited in the wild and you have those vulnerabilities in your environment, then that immediately makes those risks much higher priority, right? Regardless. And if you have like attack paths and chains within your environment that are known paths that threat actors, can exploit, then that's, that needs to inform your prioritization like ASAP, right? And so So, we've seen threat intelligence be so valuable on the defense side and kind of the IOC side, and being able to kind of help with detection and response. And now I think we're really starting to see an expansion of that threat intelligence to be used for informing the offensive teams, right? Hey, these are the things we should go test for. When we're scoping out an engagement with a third-party provider, these are the threat actors we may want to start focusing on, or the TTPs related to them. So I see that becoming a very strong strategy as well. And I think it's incredibly valuable. I think that's knowing your enemy and being able to at least know how to prevent the known knowns, or at least detect them and or start testing for them is the best place to start, in my opinion.
Yeah. What's your take on threat intel, Dahvid?
I love it, honestly. No, I think that like the biggest issue in security in general is that the majority of our organizations, the defenders and the offensive security professionals, really just don't understand what crime looks like, right? We don't look into it as deeply. Like, we still have a lot of that Hollywood-esque, like, throw the mask over the face and then pull out the gun. Give me all your money. It's like it doesn't really happen for the most part in actual cyber crime. And so with the integration of threat intel, especially in the defense side, and now much more heavily in the offensive side, we're able to start to look at organizations from a different light, depending on what kind of threat actors would be willing to attack them, right? Like, if you don't have a PCI front end page that you're buying and selling from a marketplace, it makes very little sense that the threat actor MageCart would be attacking you, right? But if you're a pharmaceutical company, then maybe APT1, APT24, right? Like, you can start to put into play who is the most realistic threat actor that would be coming against you, and then focusing those efforts towards defending against what is most relevant for you. Like, it just helps streamline that process instead of trying to do the shotgun blast of block as many MITRE TTPs as you possibly can, because it just doesn't work. It's not effective, and quite frankly, eventually your computers stop communicating.
Yep.
Most secure system is a system that doesn't talk to the internet.
That's right. That's the systems we like most, right? Except for air gap things, and then
Right.
got a
Yeah.
whole
You just
other
read the little
problem.
blinky lights.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. But so, kind of on that topic, Dahvid, how do you see like security and IT teams kind of working together to turn all of that vulnerability data into actionable fixes?
So it's a slow process that we're getting better at, right? I think before we had this kind of disconnect between IT and security, not allowing them to really be a part of one another just because of that clear separation of responsibilities. IT is supposed to make things work. Security is supposed to make things not work. Like, you have these two different ideologies that compete against one another. I think now that we're starting to integrate those a little bit heavier with like the roles like CISOs and CIOs, CTOs kind of taking more of a lead into security, we're able to kind of streamline that process through just having the same work area, right? Different teams tend to not want to always work together and shake hands all the time, right? So integrating them was the first step in getting us to a place where it makes sense. The next piece is really just teaching people how this happens, right? The best possible thing that I've seen come out of the industry in the last 5 years has been this uptick of purple teaming, right? Just this idea where you sit down with a defender and you go, I'm going to run this attack. Oh, well, we didn't see that in the SIM, or we didn't see that in the EDR logs. And you're able to go and fix it. And they're also able to see how that attack happens. Just having the understanding of what is occurring in the process of the crime helps people figure out how to solve it. If you show somebody the front door, hey, I'm going to open up the front door. Now I can walk right in. Oh, okay, maybe we should lock it, right? It reinforces that idea of like unlocked door allows anyone to walk in. So it's been the best possible thing to kind of push forward. If you're not doing it already as an org, highly recommend just sitting down and doing at least a purple team a year on top of your normal testing, just so your guys get some training, they get some understanding, some knowledge.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on the purple teaming aspect. I've seen a lot of great success with organizations I've worked with too that have integrated purple teaming into the way that they're doing their security training, just kind of supplementing that with their pen testing and other things that they're doing is just highly valuable. So Dan, what's your take on this in terms of the remediation workflow?
Yeah, I mean, and David hit a lot of good points. I've always touted, and this has always been like a core principle of PlexTrac is like just deeper collaboration, right? I mean, I think those of us that kind of cut our teeth in the early 2010s or whatever you call it, but like we were always kind of trying to convince people like they needed to invest in security, and then all the bad things, because the bad things might happen and the bad things happen. And so now people do understand the need for security these days, but it's like, more, how do you continue to communicate the risk and collaborate with the teams that are actually responsible for fixing the issues? And so that's what I wanted to kind of like, call out too, is like, Dee's really talking about that deep collaboration. And in order to have that, you have to understand the why behind it, right? And so like that's the risk understanding. And I think that we've gotten really a lot better as an industry of being able to communicate risk, maybe not the best, but like well enough to be able to say like, okay, if I'm an IT team and we report into the same person, we understand where our goals are aligned here. So I think security teams have done a good job and continue to do a good job of like communicating like, hey, we're not here to just shut the business down. We're here to like make sure we can all work together to like reduce risk as much as possible, keep the business running, and then that by doing this, everybody wins at the end of the day. And so I think that deep collaboration, having visibility into for everybody to understand, hey, these are the most critical things. Like this is why we think this is important. Again, kind of coming back to showing that it's exploitable through threat intelligence, correlating it with other vulnerabilities in the environment. Because I think sometimes when you talk about silos of workflows, right? The IT team or a standalone development team, they are just getting something thrown over the fence at them, and they're like, well, why should I fix this? Like, you're saying it's critical, but I've got 3 projects that that once we get them out the door, our business is going to grow tenfold or whatever. So it's like that to me feels more like a higher priority. And so having visibility for all the teams to say like, hey, this is why we're able to do, or this is why we're saying this is the more important thing that you should focus on because of these factors. So I think it's definitely comes down to kind of that standard, like being able to communicate risk well, collaboration, and having the visibility across the teams to not necessarily interrupt their workflows, but be able to have visibility into what items they're working on from a risk reduction, as well as they can see for themselves, like, okay, yeah, based on the risk posture you're reporting as a security team, okay, like, yeah, I can understand why you would say this is something that we should go work on.
Yeah, really good points. So, what do you guys think about the future? Like, maybe look into your crystal ball. What do we see the future for vulnerability remediation? I know you're going to say AI, right? Is it just AI, or is it more than AI?
I mean, for me, I mean, David, if you wanted to jump in, but I think it's just continued focus on automation, right? So whether that's an AI powered thing or not, I think that we're going to continue to see better correlation of data, better automation around the workflows themselves. I think, again, one of the core principles I've always tried to emphasize is that, hey, if we can eliminate a lot of the menial tasks, and just have like automation wherever possible with some human intervention in the right steps, that improves everything around the workflow so that people can stay focused on the most important things. So when we talk about like hacking and penetration testing, the less time, from a PlexTrac perspective, the less time those folks can spend on reporting, the more time they're going to spend on finding the deep, intricate vulnerabilities, right? Because pen testers don't have all the time in the world like threat actors do, literally. And so like those same principles on the remediation side is like, hey, if we can put those into a workflow where all of the minor, like the small tasks that can be automated are, and then human intervention for any kind of risk oriented or compensating control oriented discussions and intervention, that's where I really see the kind of the future going. So AI probably will play a factor in that, but I think it's more the principles of like, hey, what problem are we trying to solve? And I think those are some of the most important aspects, just from a practical and very tactical perspective.
Yeah. What's your take on that, Dahvid?
Yeah, I think automation is definitely the big one, right? I get the hype around AI, right? But I think what a lot of people don't realize is that AI lacks emotion. It lacks human mentality, right? And crime is inherently a human mentality. And so the risk that comes from crime only comes from the fact that we understand that it occurs. So with strong automation, being able to ingest a lot of data from a lot of sources into the risk scoring that you choose is best for you, then that's really what we should be focusing on. I think you'll see a lot of in the future, a lot of these gimmicky products that are push out AI and whatnot. And really the big hope is that we use those AI or automation tool sets to put what we are determining as the criticals, the highs, the mediums and lows into perspective, right? AI is great with a lot of data. There's a reason why it's become a phenomenal tool set today. But it's not going to push us too far out of the weeds to where we're like, oh yeah, it's going to take all our blue teamers jobs, or it's going to take all our red teamers jobs, where the moment it does, I don't think we're going to have a job. So it really doesn't matter at that point.
Yeah.
We'll be in a dystopian or a utopian future,
One
one
of
of the
those
two.
days, right?
One of those cases, hopefully the latter.
Yes.
But for now, right now, it's a lot of automation. And the more that you can speed up your processing time and getting to the weeds of actually cutting the head off the snake and remediating the most risky items first, like that's the most important aspect. And I think we'll see teams like Dan's and at PlexTrac like trying to tackle that problem to the point to where we're taking off the days of potential research, maybe even weeks or months, depending on how deep in the weeds the tool set goes, where we're not having to worry anymore about which one should I fix first, right? We can contextually risk score it and then remediate.
Yeah. Yeah. Love it. Love it. So this has been a great discussion on vulnerability remediation with you both. We covered a lot today, from talking about the data problem to prioritizing what matters, and then making sure remediation actually happens, and some great strategies were discussed as well. So huge thanks to both of you for sharing your insights. If our listeners want to connect with you or learn more about your work, where can they find you? Start with you, Dahvid.
A field in Kansas, preferably. You'll have to use a signal flare to get to me. No, LinkedIn's probably the best. It's my first and last name, very easy. I have a very unique name, so it kind of hurts when you're trying to hide from the internet, right?
Nice.
But reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to answer questions and on any topic, especially when it comes down to crime.
Awesome. What about you, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, yeah, like LinkedIn is the best way to get in touch or to reach out. But then obviously you can learn a lot more about PlexTrac as our product and company at just plextrac.com. And yeah, thanks so much for letting us be on the show, Tom. It's been fun.
Yeah, great discussion. And by the way, you can all go to plextrac.com/shared security if you're interested in PlexTrac and finding out more information about Dan and the great products that they have. So to our audience, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you subscribe wherever you like to get your podcasts. And be sure to check out the next episode in our series with PlexTrac coming soon. So until next time, stay safe, stay secure, and stay private. Thank you for watching or listening to this episode. Be sure to subscribe wherever you like to get your podcasts. Visit sharedsecurity.net for merch, previous episodes, and more. If you'd like to help support the podcast, join our Patreon to get ad-free episodes and many more exclusive supporter-only benefits. Visit sharedsecurity.net/supporter for more details.